Okay.
All right. Before we move on to, and I'm going to go through the addressing and sending the program down, that type of stuff. But one last thing on the circuit here. Let me get logged back in.
Nice of you to show up.
You guys are awful quiet. What an orderly class.
Okay. So, and one of the things too that's new to Dixell, to XM, that Publix has been asking for a long time, it's called relative alarming. So you guys are used to, if you change the set point, the case temp set point, you got to change the alarm set point as well. They're not linked together. We call that absolute alarming, which means it's going to alarm at an absolute value. So with XM, we now have what we call relative alarming, and relative alarming sets it up to where if I say I want my alarm setting to be 10 degrees, it's going to move with the set point. So it's always going to be 10 degrees above the set point. So you change the set point, you don't have to mess with the alarm setting anymore. It moves with that. It's called relative alarming. The XM circuit defaults to all of your alarms being disabled. So the only one Publix wants to see is case high temp. So this sheet also has how to set up the relative alarming for the high temp per Publix's standards. The one thing you got to do is we would go into case alarm high temp, and again we're in the XM circuit setup. Case alarm high temp, out of the gate that's going to say disabled. Hit F4 to look up, or hit the next button until it goes to alarm. You have disabled, notice, and alarm. They want to see alarm there. When you do that, it's going to bring up another menu of all this stuff. The case alarm high is 10 degrees. That's 10 degrees above the set point. Let me go back here. This case alarm config relative, that's where we get that relative alarming. So you have absolute and you have relative. So as long as you pick relative, you're good. You don't ever have to mess with your settings anymore. And then they have a 75-minute delay on the alarm. Their hysteresis on the alarm is 0, which means that as soon as the case temp drops below the alarm set point, it will erase the alarm. The hysteresis would say if you had 2 degrees, it would say I have to be 2 degrees below the alarm set point to clear the alarm. Publix says as soon as we drop below the alarm value, we want the alarm to go away. So the hysteresis is 0, and the priority is 1. And the reason for that, they are monitoring. They have a monitoring department there. I'm sure you guys have several stores that are monitoring. They've got about 600 plus stores that are monitoring right now. Soon to be all of them. But these are the parameters that they want in there. So that's like I said. I think without relative alarming, it'll make it a lot easier on you guys too. If you change the set point, you don't have to mess with the alarm setting anymore. So. All right, and that's pretty much it. So the next thing we want to do is if you went through and you programmed all this and you went by this sheet here, then it's going to walk you through setting all those parameters up. The next thing you're going to do is you want to associate the device in the circuit. So that tells the E2 that hey, this circuit goes with this device. And the way that you do that, it is menu 774, 7 for system configuration, 7 for network setup.
5.
Sorry?
Section 7.
Oh, yeah, we're page 5, section 7. Associate the XM device and circuit. And then we're going to go controller associations. And this works the same with CCB and CC100. So if you guys have done them with those, this is all works the same. XM circuits, and then we bring up this screen. Now, what we have here is we have all the devices listed over here. I've only got 2 of them put in here now, but you know, if you had 30 case controllers on a store, you'd see all 30 of them over here. And then over here, what we have is the circuit. So if you had 3 devices to 1 circuit, then what you would do is those 3 devices, you'd pick the same circuit for each one of the devices. Well, since Publix doesn't work that way, it's 1 device per circuit. Makes it a lot easier. So if I hit F4 lookup, it's going to show me the XM circuits that I have configured. And this is where the naming comes in handy. If you name them similarly, 1.01 on the device, 1-01 here, then it makes it a lot easier. And then it's associated. And the next one, I haven't named yet, but I'm going to look it up. We're going to select that second one. Now, once you've associated the device, I mean, that's all it takes for association. The next thing, if you go back into the device setup, now what you're going to see is those 2 are now linked, and you're going to see a lot of information that wasn't there the first time. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to do menu 5400. And we'll go into the setup. And on this home screen down here, now we have this down here where it says associated yes. So that's how you know if you go into an XM setup and if it says no, then you need to associate it to an XM circuit, because what happens now is all these fields here were blank before we associated it. Now we've associated it, it's made all these links. It does it all for you. You don't have to fill all that in. So it's, and including the alarming too. So let me get to the alarm config, C9. So yeah, it's got well, and actually, so what after you associate it, a lot of the stuff disappears, because if it's in the XM circuit, then it's no longer going to be shown in the device. So before we associated it, there was a whole lot more parameters that were here. Once you associate it and it has that circuit to relate to, it no longer has those parameters in here. So you won't even see them because it resides in the device or in the circuit itself. So. All right. After we associate the device, the next thing we want to do is we want to go and address the device. What I would highly suggest doing when you're bringing these online and you have your network up is, before you power all these up, unplug your network from the E2. And the reason for that is if you power all these devices up, every one of them have a default address of 1. Well, if so, you got all these powered up and you got the network plugged in, and the E2 sees all these number 1 addresses, it's going to get confused. So I highly suggest unplugging your network, powering them up, and then go through and addressing each one of them individually. And then once you have them addressed, then you can plug your network back in. But to address it, it's pretty simple. From the keypad, you hold the down button and the set button at the same time. And sometimes it takes twice. So I hold the down button and the set button, and then EEU pops up. That tells me that I'm in the programming mode. So once I get in programming mode, then I'm going to arrow down, and like I said, there's all these codes for these settings. ADR, it's capital A, lowercase d, lowercase r. That's the address. So if I hit the set button again, it's going to show me this address is number 1. If I want to change it, hit the up button to whatever one you want.
And that's unlimited, right?
It has up to 99 addresses. You can address up to 99. So The other thing too, if you had a new store or even on a remodel, I would suggest keeping a notepad or something of what address you use, because that way when you go back to the E2, then you know which one you had. Because if you put one in here and you think it's one here and they're not the same, it won't come online. So very important to keep notes of where you address them, and then even take like a Sharpie and write on the box what the address is. So I'd probably write the circuit number and the address on the outside of that box. So if you're trying to troubleshoot later on, you can see which one it was. So I just think it's helpful. Okay, then once you get your address set, I'm going to hit the set button, and then the next parameter is BR. That's baud rate. Baud rate's pretty important. This XM device, it defaults at 9600. However, the E2 defaults at 19.2. So they got to be the same. You really want to run them off 19.2. You could change the E2 Modbus setup to 9600, but like I said, it's pretty sluggish. The E2 defaults at 19.2. I'd leave the E2 alone. Leave it at 19.2 and change it from here. If it's at 9600, it's going to say 96. So hit the up button, it goes to 19.2, and then hit the set button, and then you're good. And then if you just walk away from this, it'll exit the programming mode in 15-20 seconds. So, or if you wanted to, you can hit the set up, and it automatically exits. But anyway, just walking away, it will reset itself. And I'm going to set this one here to number 2. Again, set and down.
Blaine, can you put that in front of the camera?
I would. Yeah, I would. Let me see if I can do that. Alright. So yeah, we're going to hit the set and the down button until the EEU appears. That says that you're in programming mode. So I'm going to hit the down arrow button until I get to ADR. That's the address. I'm going to set. This one's already set for 2. I can change it. Then the next parameter is BR, baud rate. And again, it defaults at 9600. I want to change that to 19.2. And that's it. So once you get your addresses set here, again, I would plug the network back in, and then you want to go to your network summary, Alt-N, and I have to commission them. So right now, the E2 is looking at it, doesn't really know what to look for. I have to set the address here. Again, that's where your notes would come in handy. You walk through, address them all there. You've got your notes in front of you. And then highlight this first device, hit F4. Most time you're only going to have one Modbus network. Take that back. You could have 2, because I think Hill Phoenix is putting CoreSense for the Copeland compressors on Modbus as well. And I think they're using COM6, and they're using Modbus 2 for that. With the Dixells, we usually use COM4 and Modbus 1. So I'm going to select that, and then I get a list of it. So this first one I'm going to say is address number 1. So I just highlight 1, hit enter. It's asking for verification. I hit enter again, and then it says the Modbus address is set. I can hit the back staircase now, and it's already online. So they come online pretty quick. Short network here, so it's going to be a little bit faster. But one of the things I hear from a lot of the startup guys is these are real easy to get online. If it doesn't come up online, you've either got a network broken somewhere, maybe you got duplicate addresses, but usually for the most part they come online pretty easily. And the second one, we'll commission it. Again, Modbus 1, and we're going to pick 2, verify, and then back staircase. And it's already online as well. Now, like I said, that's a little bit faster than normal. Usually it'll take 5-10 seconds to come online, but they do come online pretty fast. The next thing you want to do, as soon as you bring it online, Again, the parameters that are sitting in there right now are default parameters that don't work. We have initial sync set to no. So at this point, nothing's going to happen until it reaches that 12-hour period. So every 12 hours, the E2 is going to send its parameters down. We don't want to wait 12 hours. We want them online now. So how do I do that? Again, let's go to menu 5400. That's our XM devices. And I'm going to hit enter, and we're on the summary screen. So from the summary screen, we have an action menu. You hit enter, and then you hit 9 for application commands, and number 6 right here is send E2 config to device. So that will immediately send all of the parameters down to that device. So if I hit 6, it's going to do it. And when it does that, what's going to happen is it's going to reset, and it'll take a few minutes. It's not an immediate thing. But this thing should reset here in just a minute, and when it resets, it'll actually blink off. I would caution you to, if you have, say, 15, 20 circuits that you're bringing online, I would not send this device to all 15 or 20 of them at one time. I would do it one at a time. Otherwise, you can overload the network. So, I had that at a store over in Naples. Okay, it's resetting now. Let's see. Oh, it's already reset. So it blinked and it reset. So now the parameters have been sent in there. But yeah, I had a store in Naples where they were going through sending that config. They were just going one circuit, send it, next circuit, send it, next circuit, overloaded the network, and a lot of the parameters did not get pushed down. So then what happens is it kind of sits there in limbo until it goes through its natural progression. And it could take 2 or 3 days to get all the parameters sent down at that point. So again, that's what I would caution you to do. Do it one at a time, and then after you do it, make sure that all your values come up. And then once all your values come up, then you can go to the next one, and then you do the same thing. So we'll come out of that one, we'll go to this other one and force these parameters down. Again, that's enter 9 6. Send E2 config to device. Anytime you bring it online, that's what you want to do. That's how you get everything that you programmed in the E2 down on that device. Once you get in that device, it resides there. It's all good. So you've overrode them, and it's not something that you'd have to do every day. But if you did want to make changes, and you go in, let's say you change your set point, or you change your defrost termination temp, something like that, then you would want to go through this progression again and force those values down. So, and again, I don't have any probes hooked up to this, so you're not going to see values. But if you're in a live store, then what would happen is all these would go to none when it was rebooting, and then they would start populating the temperatures. So, I would, check first your discharge temp, make sure your defrost termination comes up, and then come over and make sure that you're getting an evaporator pressure, and let's see, I don't think it shows, and then the superheat. So it doesn't really show what your your coil out temp is, but as long as you get a superheat reading, you're getting that it's reading both values. So, all right. So that's pretty much setting it up. So that's really the important part, is to make sure that you get these parameters down into here. Once you've got all your parameters from the E2 down into here, that's 99% of your problems resolved. So getting the parameters in there. Once you got all your parameters in there, thing works pretty smooth. So.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
On those screens, like sometimes the location, you have pipe and stuff in the way and you can't really get to it easy. Can you use regular belting to extend that to maybe set it up on top?
You sure can.
There's
It's
no
no cable. I mean, it's we ship a cable, or we make a cable that's about 6 foot long, but it's just for a RS-485 belting cable.
All right.
Yep, 2 conductor. Yep, you can make it as long as you want. And you can actually take that display from this device, move to this device. It's not specific to the device. All it's doing is reading what's in the controller. So you can take one display and move it to multiple devices. But Hill Phoenix is putting them in every case.
Right.
If you get a new store with walk-ins, the walk-ins come with it as well, but it's loose, so you have to actually connect it up. And the reason we do it that way is we don't really know. There's a lot of different customers that use them. So some want it mounted remotely, some want it in the cabinet. So we ship it loose on a walk-in. So, but again, the action menu is pretty important. How to force your parameters down. So that's one, and that's in here too under Appendix A. It kind of tells you how to do that. One of the other things that you can do if you wanted to reset your algorithm, like we talked about earlier, is like, you know what, they just finished loading the case. There's 2 ways you can do it. You can either send the E2 config down again and that'll reboot, which will restart the algorithm, or there's another option on there that just says reset device, and all it does is just reboot the device. So either way will work to reset the algorithm. Replacing an XM device. So if you had one of these fail and you needed to replace it, again, if you when you're on the network, all the parameters are already in the E2, so we don't have to go through a whole lot of that rigmarole. But the first thing I would check is your sync action. So if you're going to replace this device, go into the setup of the device, and you want to make sure that this is send E2 config to device. Some people will reverse it. It's not uncommon to see that send device config to E2. And I tell you, there is one circumstance where you'd want to do that. If your case lights are blinking off, on a door case, it's not a big deal because they're all the time popping off. But like in a meat case or something, twice a day when the E2 sends its config down to the device, that device reboots. And it's only for a split second, but those lights are going to blink off when it reboots. So, yeah, so if your meat manager calls it, hey, how come my lights go off for a second every day? That's why it's doing that reboot. Now, you can fix it by changing this sync action, this config sync action. And if you reverse that, it'll stop that from happening. Send device config to E2. But I would caution you on that. I wouldn't do it at startup. I would, in fact, I wouldn't do it until they complain about it, to be honest with you, because by doing that, you want to make sure that you got all the parameters in here. So I like to leave it at the E2 sending its parameters down to there, just to make sure that everything's in there. And I say leave it that way for at least a week, just to make sure that you've got that you're pushing those parameters in there. Once they reside in there, then it's not a big deal to reverse that action and have it send back up to the E2 so it doesn't reboot. But again, just make sure it's ran long enough to where you've pushed all the parameters in there. So, and what I've seen, and I've probably been pretty cautious on it, but within the first time that you push, it should push all the parameters in there the first time. I've seen it to where sometimes it'll miss a parameter and you have to do it again. That's not that uncommon, but honestly, you could probably push it down and go back the next day and reverse that sync action, and you'd probably be okay. But like I said, I caution you to let it run for at least a week before you change it. So, but anyway, so if you're going to replace a device, that's why you want to make sure that this is in the right location. You want it back to the send E2 config to device. Because when you replace a device, the one that you're going to be putting in there, it's got those nasty parameters that nobody likes. So we don't want them overwriting the E2. So I want to make sure that that's set. Again, I double check your initial sync, make sure it's set to no. We don't want those getting pushed into the E2. And this is in Appendix B in this document. for replacing the XM device. The next thing I'd do is unplug I'd unplug the COM port at the E2 when you go to, because again, when you power this thing up, it's going to have a device address as 1 as default. You're already going to have a 1 on the network. You don't want duplicate addresses. It could just kind of screw things up a little bit. So again, unplug the network at the E2. All the other ones on the network will run in standalone mode until you plug it back in. It should only be a few minutes. And then the next thing you would do is obviously unplug your all your wires and replace your device. All the inputs are Phoenix connectors on the bottom. Those are pretty easy to replace. The power wires on the top that go to your relays and your fans and stuff, those are screw terminals, so make sure you mark those. And then once you replace the device and you put your new device in, you power it up, you got to set your address and your baud rate. So you got to do those again because, like I said, that resides in the device itself. So if you put the same address and the same baud rate you had in the old controller, then the E2 will recognize it. So next thing you do is go plug your network back in. Don't forget that. And then you would go through the commissioning process that we just went through, which is the network summary, highlight the device, commission it, assign the address. I mean, it should already be there, but I would just recommission it just to make sure. And then it should pop up online. Send those parameters down to the new device, because again, you have a new device with the bad parameters in it. So you'd want to go to the config sync action, or not? I'm sorry, not the. You'd want to go to the action menu. Let's go to menu 5400. And I know we went through this again, but if you're like me, you never get it the first time. So I got a new device. I just brought it online. First thing I want to do, hit the enter button. 9 and then 6. I want to send that E2 config back to the device. And then again, watch all your parameters. They should all populate back in. And then that's it. So replacing the device, not too difficult. Like I said, just follow the steps and should work out. Good thing is all your parameters are already in the E2, so you don't have to go through all this reprogramming stuff. So, all right, on the troubleshooting, there's several pages in here on troubleshooting. I highly suggest you guys look through those. Everything that's in there has been from a phone call that I've received from Dixell. So every issue has been is a real issue. It's been something that somebody has seen and how we fixed it. So again, that's pretty important stuff. I'll hit some of the more popular ones. We already hit the case lights blinking off. That's in here. One of them I've had a few calls on actually is the XM circuit says that it's in defrost, and you can actually go down to the device itself and it's in refrigeration. You're like, how the hell does that work? Well, what has happened is the device and the XM circuit have gotten out of sync. So what you would do is you would delete the association to those two. And I see that's in here. We'll walk through that real quick. Okay, so that's on page 11. Actually, maybe page 12. No, it is page 11. It's the bottom one. Defrost parameter changes made in XM are not working. Actually, there's another one in here that says basically the same thing. Okay, well, let's see. We'll get, yeah. So what we want to do is it says to reassociate the XM device and the XM circuit. So what we would do is we'd go back to menu 774 to controller associations, the exits, and if we wanted to reassociate it, what we would do is we would highlight the circuit, and if you hit the delete button, then it deletes that association. Now what I would do is I would go out of this backspace just to make sure it saved it, and then go back into it again, and then just reassociate it. And then after you reassociate it, again, I'd go back and I'd force those parameters down. Any change that you make, the E2 should do that automatically. It's supposed to recognize when you've made a change in the E2, and it's supposed to send those down, but I wouldn't trust it. I'd do it manually. Just that way you know it's done. That's you. Like I said, that's not as common now as it used to be. Like I said, one of the earlier firmwares, 406 F01, that was a big problem on, and we've supposedly fixed it in the newer versions of firmware, but I still have seen it occur, just not nearly as often. So something to look for. The next thing that you're going to see a lot of is defrost. I've had multiple calls, usually, hey, this thing won't stay in defrost. It keeps coming out of defrost. Usually what happens is first major problem that I saw, and this one drove me nuts, was they had defrost put in for 1 minute. So the defrost, when you go to an XM circuit, alright, we want to go to the setup, and we go to our Defrost Times. So this Defrost Time, those are in hours and minutes. And down here in green, if you ever forget, there's this green line down here is kind of information line, and it'll tell you what format is supposed to be put in, and the format is hours and minutes. I've had people go in and say, I need an hour defrost. They put 1. Well, that's 1 minute. Well, what happens is, let's back up 2 tabs. Back, not forward. We have a parameter here that says minimum defrost time, and you can set that to whatever you want, but that's just saying whenever I go in defrost, I have to be in defrost. Default is 2 minutes. Well, when they put what they thought was 1 hour, it was really 1 minute, and what happened is so the E2 said go into defrost, and so they put it into defrost, they go down to the device, and it's already out of defrost. By the time they got down there, the time had elapsed. But then I've also had people say, well, it's pulsing, it's bouncing in and out of defrost. Well, again, they did the 1 minute, so it went in defrost for a minute, and they're watching it from the E2, and then it comes out of defrost after 1 minute, and then it goes right back into defrost. And the reason for that is this minimum defrost time. When you set the defrost time for 1 minute, after that 1 minute, it came out of defrost, and then E2 said, no, you didn't meet your minimum defrost time, go back into defrost. So it goes back into defrost until that minimum time is reached. So it kind of looks like it's bouncing in and out. Again, all it was the time was put in wrong. So one of the other defrost calls I've got, again, this was probably an issue at 1333. Not so much 553, but 1333. I had this on a lot of Hill Phoenix cases. They called and they said, I'm not staying in defrost. It's coming out of defrost. I'm not getting my cool defrosted. So first thing I did, I showed up on the job site and I graphed the defrost termination temp. And what was happening was it's hitting defrost termination within 10 minutes of going into defrost. I said, there ain't no way it's getting there in 10 minutes. Well, what happened was the probe was mounted on the top of the coil, so all the heat was rising and it was tripping that defrost termination setting within 10 minutes of going into defrost. So the real issue there was the defrost probe was mounted in the wrong spot. So it hits that termination temp and it takes it out of defrost. If the defrost termination probe is above defrost termination setting, it will not defrost. It will not, because it says I'm above my termination temp. I will not. There's no such thing as an emergency defrost. So if it is, and that's something that we're going to add in a future release. But at this point, the XM does not support emergency defrost. So if your termination temp is above the set point, it's going to take it out of defrost, regardless of whether it's met its minimum defrost time or anything. It will not stay in defrost.
Can you just adjust the defrost time higher?
You
just
can
for that moment, and then just change it back.
There's two things you can do. You can change. You can move your termination temperature to 99. That would do it. I wouldn't suggest it because you can forget about it. You can walk away from it, forget about it, and it's still there. The real issue is the probe needs to be moved. But if you're there in the middle of the night and that coil is, you got to pull everything out to get to the defrost termination probe, because they mount them in the center of the case on the top of the coil, and you just can't get to them. You can go into the program and we can say, instead of looking at my defrost termination probe, I want to look at my coil out probe for defrost termination. I'll show you how to do that. That's one way. That's probably your best way of doing it. If you can't move the probe immediately, you can make it look at a different probe for that termination. Or the other thing is you can just bump up your termination temp.
So that would just go on to P2 or whatever the probe is, and that would.
Yes. Yeah, we would add P6. Yeah, so we would change it from P2 to P6. I'll show you how to do that. Well, let's go ahead and do it now. So that would be in the XM device. So we'd have to exit the circuit, go back to menu 5400. And go into the setup. And let's go to C7 for defrost. And this first parameter here, defrost probe A. So that's what probe do I look at for my defrost termination. If I hit F4 lookup, I've got an older version of firmware here. I'll tell you the difference. P5. P5 is a typo. And if you have 307 or 407 firmware, it's going to say P6 here. There was a typo in 406 firmware. But really what that is that's P6. Because P5 is the transducer. It will not look at the transducer for defrost termination. Again, it's a typo. The newer versions will say P6. You select P6 there, and now it's going to look at your coil out for your defrost termination. So that's a quick fix for it. Again, I suggest moving your defrost termination.
It was electric defrost, right?
Yeah, electric defrost. So what happens in that particular scenario when it was the probe was mounted in the wrong place and it kept hitting termination temp. The contractor didn't figure it out. The probe was in the wrong spot. They kept trying to band-aid it. So they went in. One of the things they did was they went into the minimum defrost the minimum defrost setting, and they bumped that up to 45 minutes. So you had your defrost duration was 60 minutes. They said minimum defrost time 45 minutes. And so what would happen then was it would reach that termination temp and it would shut off. Well, and then once that temp dropped, then it would re-engage the heater again, because it's saying I'm not in minimum defrost. I have not met my minimum defrost time yet. So I reached that termination point, I shut off, and then once the temperature drops below, I'm still haven't met my minimum defrost time, so I go back in. So it looks like a pulse defrost. It's in and out of defrost. Again, it was all because the probe was in the wrong place.
Where did y'all put the probe at?
Hold on, I didn't put the probe in. Hill Phoenix was mounting the probe in the center of the coil, on top of the coil. I mean, at the top, not on top of the coil, but in the top section of the coil. So the defrost heater was below it, and the heat was rising off of the heater. Yeah. So what they've done now is they've moved it. It's actually in the end of the coil. That was the other thing too. You couldn't get to it. It was in the center, so you had to pull the whole bottom of the case, pull the fan shroud to find the thing. It's not a good spot. What they did now is they now put it in a empty slot in the bottom from the side of the case where the expansion valve's mounted. They've actually got it inserted into the bottom of the coil into an empty slot. So works a lot better now. But again, 1333, I'm willing to bet it's in the wrong spot. So that's a good.
Sorry.
So anyway, that's probably been one of the
That's the old CCB coil in temperature spot for low temp case.
Is that what that is?
It was a bare section of the coil at the top in the center of the coil where they put the sensor. That was the inlet temperature sensor for CCBs.
That makes sense of why they put it. So they were
They put
old
it there
habits die
because-
hard. They just put the wrong probe there.
Yeah, they put it there. They couldn't get a good reading on low temp cases for superheat. They moved the temp sensor to the center of the coil top.
Okay. So that explains
Why there's
why
a
they.
gap there.
Yeah, they have fixed it. 553 is probably in the right spot. Yes, sir.
Did you go over on diagnosing the board's bad before these guys?
Yes.
The board is bad, and we send them in and we say nothing wrong.
So when I seen the board is bad, most of the time I couldn't get it to come online. So the first time I saw a bad board, actually the thing would power up. Everything looked normal from the display, and it was in the middle of the lineup, and it was the only one that wouldn't come online. And check the address, check the baud rate, check the connections, everything. And the modules before it and after it were all online, so we knew it wasn't a broken network. We replaced the device, and it came right online. So that's one of the things I've seen for a bad device.
Are you still getting 2.3 and 2.6 on your wire firmware?
Yes. Everything was right for whatever reason. And what we found was there was a screw that had been mounted on the bottom of the plate. So, the box that houses all the case control stuff has a base plate in it. There was a screw that was ran up from the bottom of it. I have no idea why. Don't ask me why. But it was ran up from the bottom of it. And whenever we took the DIN rails off of the case controller to try to pull the case controller out to replace it, we couldn't physically pull it off because that screw had actually pierced the circuit board, and that's why it wouldn't come online. So
So look for a screw in the circuit.
yeah, I hope that they have since. I don't know what it was for. I don't know if they were just trying to hold it in place so it didn't rattle around in shipping. I don't know, but you couldn't get to the screw because you'd have to pull the whole base plate out. Anyway, that's one thing. One of the other things I've seen is we could not get a sensor to read. It was actually the coil out sensor. Would not read. Check the wiring. All the wiring was right. We replaced the sensor. We just plugged a new sensor into the same port, and it wouldn't read it.
Could you use P3 or P4 that you're not using?
No, well, it was only P6 was the only one that wouldn't read. So we were reading probes on all the other ones, and we took a probe. We actually took the discharge air probe and plugged it into P6, and it wouldn't read it. It'd read it on discharge air, but it wouldn't read it plugged into P6.
But I'm just saying, if P3 and P4 aren't being used, are you able to use them?
Not for coil out.
Not for coil.
Yeah, coil out is the one. Well, let me take that back. PB5, the transducer, obviously can't move it. That's the only transducer place on there. And P6 for coil out, I could not move. I can move the discharge air probe around. I can move it to P2 or P3 or P4. I can move the defrost termination probe around, but I cannot move the coil out probe. I cannot make it look at something else. So that's hard. It's hard coded in to look at that probe for superheat. So yes, sir.
Can you also show them how to put it in defrost?
Good one. There you go.
Because
Yes,
it's
sir.
different than what they're used to.
Yeah. So if we Okay, so if we go to the circuits, we'll go F3, and then the circuits. So this is our circuit summary screen. You guys should be pretty familiar with this. Again, if you hit the enter button from here, it brings up our action menu. Hit 9 for application commands, and 1 is start defrost. That's how you force a defrost. You can also do it from the keypad. Keypad here, if you're here, there's a button in the middle over here. It's got a snowflake on top and raindrops on the bottom of it. That's defrost. If you click and hold that, it will send it into defrost from here too.
That would either be in the top of the case or something.
Right. I think I have this one locked out. But yeah, you got to hold it down for hold it down for 5 seconds or so. And it's got an icon here on here, so you can actually go up to this and you can see what the unit's doing. It's got icons on it. If your fan's running, it's got a fan icon that'll show up. If your defrost is on, it's got a defrost icon. So you can see what's going on from here. In the case that you had, Eric, where the fan wouldn't come on, what I would have done first was look and see if it was being called for.
It was. The little fan was on the display.
The fan was on the display, but
fans weren't running.
but the relay wasn't engaged.
So that's why I just checked all the connections and when he said it came back up.
That's a new one.
You can't take it out.
No, not from. I don't think you can. It runs through its defrost cycle. You can now. You can take it out of defrost from the E2. Again, the same thing. The action menu, 9, and then stop defrost 2. So that'll do it.
So there's no emergency defrost. You either start it or you stop it.
Right. You can start it or stop it.
What about if you got to change it from just hit F4 for looking if you got to change it from electric to time off or
Okay, that's another good question. So if you're in XM circuit and you have an off-cycle defrost case, it does not have off-cycle as an option. It's another one of those Italian idiosyncrasies. Apparently, they don't recognize off-cycle defrost. It'll still do off-cycle defrost. You just select electric, and it's engaging the output, but there's nothing happening. What you do though is in the setup.
You gotta make sure you set the fan.
Set your fans, right. And so I'm in the setup right here. If you tell it the fan mode, I'm in the XM circuit and say I want an off-cycle defrost, I change my fan mode here to defrost off. I'm sorry, defrost on for off-cycle. And that'll run your fans during your defrost. So again, if you we talked about this earlier, if it just doesn't seem to be doing anything right, temperatures aren't reading, it's not controlling, I would go in and check your in your XM device under the valve tab, go down and look at your pressure transducers and see what those max and mins are. -7 and 160 means you've got bad parameters. So if you have that, best way to fix it again is to delete the XM device and re-add it. Now, keep in mind, it's not that difficult because most everything that we set up is in the XM circuit. The XM circuit we don't have to delete. We only delete the device. So if you had the parameters that got dumped into the E2, it only dumped them into the device part. So what you would do is we go configured applications, go 400 for XM devices, and what I would do is I would delete this device. Actually, it's I got to be logged in. It's not giving it to me. Let me see if it requires it. I think it may be an access level. It should have a. Well, let me try one more. Let me try one more place here. I'm sorry. So to delete it, you'd go to the network summary. So you can't do menu 5400. You got to go to the network summary. Highlight the XM device that had the parameters loaded into. F1 is delete record. So you just delete it, and then you have to go back and add it back in. I won't go through all that because it's all outlined here. You would just go, if you had to delete a device and go back, that's how you delete it. To add it, just follow these directions. And again, that's in the troubleshooting guide too. It gives you a step-by-step on how to do that. Let's see, that will be on page 10. The top topic is devices controlling valves sporadically or does not maintain temperature or set point. So. If we've got a few more minutes here, I'll go over a couple other things too. There's been a handful of times, and mostly it's with the legacy E2 controllers. I think the networks are a little bit slower. When you first bring some of these online, and what I said, whenever you force the parameters down and you're watching this, like I said, you want to make sure everything populates. What I've seen is sometimes maybe PB2 or PB6 doesn't show up, so it won't read superheat. So, and what it is that parameter for the temperature set or for the type of probe just didn't get loaded down in. It didn't get pushed, so it won't read that particular device. First thing I do is just resend the device, resend the config down again and wait for it to reboot. If it still doesn't populate, we've had to, sometimes we have to change the address. So you go into the XM device, you change the address to one that's not used, change it back to the one that was used, force the parameter down again, and it'll send it. Worst case scenario, we did that, and that's fixed it most of the time. I had one time where that didn't fix it either. I had to delete the device and re-add it, and then it populated. So I think honestly, if you just left it and walked away from it, let's say it didn't load in PB6, so it wasn't reading your temperature, which means it's not going to do superheat. It's still going to control your case temp, and it will eventually get that parameter down there. But if you don't want to leave the store, start up morning, and you don't want to leave it like that, and you cannot get that parameter pushed down in there, you can actually set the parameter in this device here too. So you're like, what, that's the only thing that's not reading is my PB6, and it's because we didn't get it in here. So you can actually, and it's in here on how to do it, but you can actually program it into this device itself, and then it'll reside in there. But again, if you just walked away from it, it would fix itself eventually because it keeps pushing those parameters down in there. So it will get it in there at some point. So, and those are the major issues that we've seen. We can, one thing that we can do is, if you're not recovering after defrost fast enough, we can manually override the valve to 100% after defrost. I've seen it where it works pretty well. We haven't really had to use that, but it is there if it was an issue. I'll show you where that's at. We'll go to the device menu 5400, and this again is in the troubleshooting. And here it walks you through this. Set up. Under the valve tab, there is a post defrost valve percentage. So that's where the valve would go. It defaults at 100%. So it says when I come out of defrost, I'm going to go to 100%. The very next line down is post defrost time. it defaults at 0, which means it's not activated. So when it comes out of defrost, it's just going to go into its normal algorithm to try to maintain case temp and set point. So technically, you really should never have to use this, because whenever you come out of defrost, it's going to say my case temp's high. It should be opening up wide open anyway. But if it's not, and you want to force it that way, you can put a time period in here, and again, be cautious of how you enter the time. It's hours, minutes, and seconds. I had a guy that called me up and said my racks are flooding out every time it comes out of defrost. Well, come to find out, he had put 30 minutes in here, so he overrode his valve to 100% for 30 minutes on every circuit on the rack, and he was flooding the rack out. He thought he was putting 30 seconds in.
So we won't even look at superheat for that time period.
No, because it's in override.
Ouch.
It's in override.
Yeah.
So.
Well, even in recovery with a CCB, it's still modulates.
Right. Well, that's why I suggest I wouldn't even mess with it. It's there if you need it, but it defaults to not active, and like I said, it really shouldn't need it, but it is there. So. Yes, sir.
I got a question. If you said if the meat cases go on and off.
The lights.
Right.
Yeah, it would only happen. Well, it would actually only happen once a day, because one time it's going to be in the middle of the night when they're off by schedule anyway.
Okay.
The other time, so it may happen once during the day, noon, 1 o'clock, something like that, and they'll blink off for a split second.
So my question is, does that not happen with any other cases? Do you ever have fans go on and off like that too? Or?
Well, everything will, because what'll happen is when the device resets.
Right. That's my
Yeah.
point. It's like we get a call from manager saying everything's shut on and off.
And it'll only shut off for a second. I mean, it'll go off and it'll come back on.
In this case, an hour later.
But yeah, it drives a lot of. Yeah. Meat managers seem to be the ones that complain the most about that. Like I said, on the frozen food, they don't even know it because they're all on those on the sensors anyway. Yeah. So, and I've got some stores where they just, they didn't know how to fix it. This is early on, some of the early stores before this even was out, that they didn't even fix it on, and the store personnel just got used to it. I mean, it's for a split second it goes off. They got used to it. But for those that want it changed, you just go to this config sync action and just reverse that action, and that'll stop it. So, and like I said, there's no issue with that as long as you do it a week after startup. No issue with changing that. But you got to remember, if you replace your module, change it back.
Yeah.
So, at least for a week. So, and that's pretty much all the highlights I've got. Like I said, there's a lot more in this sheet that covers pretty much most of the issues. But if you have any questions too, you can call me, call Steve Yates. Our tech support, I know it's not the best, but they're coming up to speed on XM stuff as well. So if you can't get me or Steve, give them a try. Give them a chance at least to try to figure it out.
You got a card?
I do.
Lots of them?
I do have lots of them. You guys have all got Steve Yates' number. Just call him. I can say that because he's not here.
What is Steve's position now?
Steve is he still does field services, but what I was telling somebody earlier that what has happened is you guys have a service agreement with
that green
Publix that Emerson refuses to sign, so I can't send Steve to sites and get paid for him anymore. Isn't that adorable?
They love you all. The girls. Well, we're not done. Are we all finished?
Yeah.
No questions?
I mean,
What if this box fails at any given case, completely fails, and there's nothing to replace it at that point? How readily available is that box?
Yeah, that's what he was saying there.
Do we bypass that? Is there any way
we
to
can
get that
we can
running?
get them out in an emergency.
Is there an emergency way to get by that?
No, we're talking about 1 a.m.
Yeah, 1 a.m.
Ice cream
Well,
is down.
Pull your case.
They don't want to hear that.
Manager's there by himself. He's not unloading 5 doors of ice cream by
It's
himself.
public's fault for going with this.
That's not the answer, but
That's the answer. Blame it on public.
The answer would be do what you can to get it going. If you can't, it has to be down. And like John
You
said,
gotta get
it's
someone
not
like
our
John McKnight
responsibility.
or
We'll get some in
You
stock.
couldn't piggyback from another controller to try to get that case right, in other words.
That's a good question.
Yeah,
No,
I
I'm
guess
just
you could. I mean, you could hook it up to. I mean, you could probably piggyback the pulse valve off the.
Could
the
you do it like you
case.
said before, have 2 systems on one? Yeah, but they're
Be uncontrolled.
Yeah, it would. Yeah. So what would happen is this one would control. I mean, it'd be uncontrolled. It would still. It would come on with the case next to it. I mean,
Well, that's what I'm saying, but to get you
yeah.
out of a jam if you're
Yeah, it
there,
wouldn't be looking
try
at
and
the
piggyback
superheater
for
or
the night
something.
until we get the controller.
Take
But
produce.
you'd have to starve that valve to like a max 50% so you didn't flood out something. Or,
Yeah. That is something else too. If you
you know what I mean? Like take it down a multiplier.
Right.
Max,
Yeah, but I mean,
max
how
valve
hard is,
50.
I mean,
max
is it better
valve
to
50.
just tell them pull the case and leave it off?
It might be, like John said in his wise way, until we get parts. Yes, that's what the option would be, Rick. It would be, I'm sorry, sir, but this is a new Dixell controller and we don't have any in stock.
Well, we usually we could take the controller out of a produce case and put it into the frozen food.
Yeah, that's a good option. Go to a less important product like beer. You know,
not beer.
Yeah, but then you do it with beer, all the cardboard goes right.
Sexual collard greens are. You take that one.
Well, what Glenn and I were discussing at the 5-minute break was, I know you guys are all going to ask me for these.
Yes.
And what we're thinking is that you'd only need 2. You would
Right.
need basically, might be 3. You would need a meat case setup, a dairy case setup, and a frozen food. Right. So let's say you got ice cream, you just use this chip to get it to tell it it's a frozen food, and then just change it to a
You
minus
do the same
12.
with the meat, can't you?
Well, you can, but meat is going to be a hot gas defrost, or it could be and
No,
this
it
would
was
be
CCD.
it would be time off.
Yeah. Well, I think all the public's
Electric.
just using electric on all case control.
CCD.
Yeah.
Except for the dairy, they're time off and produce.
Meat and meat's time off.
No, meat
Well,
electric.
meat would be
Yeah, meat's
electric.
You or electric?
Yeah, they are electric. So.
So
Yeah, we
we
can
would
get
just
you
need
3
like
of
a
them.
medium temp meat and a frozen food.
So in a case where you have a store that's like the stores we have in my zone, in the podcast people, they're going to be changing those all out too.
Well, they're not going to be changing existing
You don't
stores to
have
case
podcast.
control.
No,
It's
these
a
are all
CCD.
CCB
Yeah,
stores.
only
Right, like
CCD.
591.
Yes.
And the new stores are all being built with loops.
Well, not yet.